Hello and welcome to this week's Confirmation to Go for the 6th and 7th grade confirmation class here at Calvary. This week we talked about the rest of the commandments, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. It was quite a bit to cover, but really we were already covering ground that we had laid, talking about the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And just filling it in with some specifics regarding each of those. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but first I'd like to go over the memory work assigned for this week, which is the 7th and 8th commandment. The 7th commandment, you shall not steal. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not take our neighbor's money or possessions or get them in any dishonest way, but help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. The 8th commandment, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbors, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. Well, it's nice that the memory work is lining up with what we talked about today. As you work through these commandments to memorize them, again, I want to encourage you to use the ECHO method. Pastor Galshut covered the 5th grade confirmation class this week. And of course, he gave an important reminder that as you go through the memory work, it's important not just to memorize it with your eyes, but to memorize it with your mouth and ears. To say it out loud, even as you're reading it, because then you're engaging more of your senses and, in fact, engaging more of your brain. And that helps with memory work. So let me give you that encouragement to, as you simply are reading it, to read it out loud so that you are getting that fuller engagement. You shall not steal. And we should fear and love God so that we do not take our neighbor's money or possessions or get them in any dishonest way. Of course, we should fear and love God, and then so that we do not, that negative aspect, take our neighbor's money or possessions, that couplet idea. And then he adds on a third one, or get them in any dishonest way, right? It's not just stealing, but any kind of dishonest act. But help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. And I have always found it very helpful on this one to memorize it as IPPI, and that helps keep it in my head. Improve and protect his possessions and income. And I think if you do that, this one comes together very easily. The 8th commandment, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Already there you have a vocabulary issue about what testimony is. And of course, testimony is courtroom language. And I would stress that because, again, if they understand what the words are, it's going to be easier for them to hang in their minds and memorize them. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation. There you have 4 things, right? Do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation. There's already some more vocab to work on, right? I think we all understand what lying is, but betrayal, right? That's if somebody tells you something in confidence, you break that confidence, or you present yourself as a friend to them, but you actually do something that proves yourselves to be an enemy. Slander, that's a courtroom term, right? That's when we speak ill about somebody in public to the point that it's actually against the law. And then that important word reputation, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But this is what our name gets attached to, right? And there's a connection here with the 2nd commandment. God doesn't want his name attached to bad things, and we don't want our name attached to bad things either. So those 4 ideas, right? Lying, betraying, slandering, and reputation. But then putting it together into this section and working through it. And then we get 3 things that we're supposed to do positively, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. In the old catechism, and this is one of those ones that I still prefer the old way, it says put the best construction on everything. But that really is explaining everything in the kindest way, not looking for reasons to be upset about it or assuming the worst, but always assuming the best. All right, so that is the memory work for this week, and I pray that you continue diligently working on that at home. As we close out the commandments, one of the things that I really want our kids to see isn't We've talked about how the Ten Commandments protects a good gift of God. It also keeps us from transgressing into dangerous things. But something else that we've really been hitting on is that each commandment is an encouragement to a virtue and a protection from a vice. So let's look at the seventh commandment. The seventh commandment protects our property, which in and of itself is kind of strange, because I think in pop culture we have the idea of the prophets or Jesus and his disciples, and because they were not people who took much possessions, and in fact Jesus encouraged them not to be very attached to their possessions, we think that one of the great driving things about Christianity is maybe to not have possessions. But then right now we have a commandment that says, no, God's possessions are something that we should have, and that people can't just take them from you, right? And sometimes people try to make Christians feel bad for having property and possessions. Well, it's an important reminder for us that many people who were very faithful were also very rich. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were incredibly wealthy, maybe the richest men in the world at the time. And certainly King David, King Solomon, these were wealthy people. Their wealth posed problems for them, and the Bible warns us of that. Jesus warns us of that. But of course, what the Bible warns us, and we sometimes get this wrong, is that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It isn't money itself, but the love of money, right? And that's, of course, the breaking of the first commandment. And it's one that's very tempting for all of us. So what virtue is God trying to instill in us? Well, he's trying to instill in us the virtue of generosity. And he's trying to protect us from the vice of greed or being miserly. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because once we recognize that God is blessing us with this property and that he does in fact want to protect it in this world, it means that we don't have to hold on to it so tight, and that we can be generous, that we can see someone in need and help them. And so this commandment doesn't exist for us to just hoard as much stuff as we want. Of course not. But it does say the things we have are ours, and they should freely be used as blessings, not just for ourselves, but for others. And then the eighth commandment, the thing it protects is our reputation, how important that is. It is a sad thing that we live in a world where we will drag people's names through the mud. Sometimes this commandment does get misused, though. We sometimes use it to say, well, you can't say any bad thing about a person because you'd be breaking this commandment. That's not true. If someone does something bad and you know about it, it's okay to say that person did something bad, right? But what this is trying to protect us from is saying things that we only think are true, or that are true, but we're spreading around in the most it's gossipy way, right? That kind of soapy way that we sometimes do, maybe exaggerating the details. If somebody does something wrong, we should never glory in it, even in the way we talk about it. It should always make us sad that someone's name is attached to a bad act, even if it's a bad act that they did. And so the virtue that this instills in us is a wonderful virtue. It's the virtue of kindness. And I think how important that is in this world. We don't always live in a particularly kind world. And we're guilty of this all, each of us ourselves, right? When somebody cuts me off in traffic, I always tend to think the worst. Oh, they did that on purpose. They were trying to make a wreck. Well, of course, that's probably not the case, right? They probably did it maybe because they were distracted. They just couldn't see me. It made a scary scene, but to kind of take a deep breath and say, no, they probably didn't mean it the way I thought they did, is an important way of keeping this commandment. Another important thing too is that when somebody does something to you that very much upsets you, instead of just stewing over it, you do go and talk to them and say, why did you do that? And what a precious thing that is, because there we grow together in understanding and even in forgiveness. And in fact, that's a really important thing I talked about. This touches on all the commandments, of course, but I don't know, it seems to just come to bear in this commandment so much more. We forgive because forgiving people is good, and we forgive because we are forgiven, of course. But there's a practical side to forgiveness too that's good for us in the now. When we are mad at somebody and we stay mad at them, upset with them, they have a claim on us. Right? You can be mad at someone and they don't even know who you are. I mean, and that's the craziest thing, right? This person has a claim on your life and control over your life in a way that, you can wake up at night and it can keep you from getting sleep. It can affect your emotions when you think about that person, all of those kinds of things. And I know it can be very hard to forgive a person, especially if they've done something very bad to you. But there is something materially good for us in forgiving and not letting this person have this claim on our life, saying, despite what you have done, I do forgive you. And to see how that kind of frees us from this hold that they can have on us. And again, that's not even the main reason why we forgive people, but it is a very real benefit that forgiveness brings. All right, then we get into the 2 coveting commandments, and sometimes these get lumped together, but I really try to pull them apart because I do think they're trying to do 2 very different things. Coveting is an important word in itself. What is our heart chasing after? What does our heart want? And of course, it's not wrong to want things. This isn't saying it's a sin to want like a new cell phone or something like that. But it is saying that when our wants are directed in the wrong direction, towards the wrong thing, and so we understand coveting as corrupted wanting and sin in that way. Wanting stuff is pretty simple for us to understand. The one thing I want to highlight here is that Luther, in the meaning to this commandment, which is very easy to confuse with the 7th commandment, by the way, he talks about inheritance a lot. And I didn't understand that as a kid growing up, why inheritance was a big part of this. But as I've gotten older and as I become a pastor, I've talked to people, I can't tell you the number of times that in actual inheritance, right, parents have died and the family fortune is being divvied up between siblings. How many times that has created anger and strife and made it so that brothers and sisters don't talk to each other and things like that. And so I think Luther really actually understood how somehow an inheritance can do so much damage, and that we shouldn't be covetous. We should be good. And what virtue does this instill in us? Well, it instills in us contentment, being content with what we have. Obviously, we will have needs, and sometimes there's a genuine lack, which should be answered by fellow people in Christ to help meet that. But to say, I don't need more than what I have. I'm going to be content with what I have. It's a wonderful thing, and I think it really does help you to see when good things do come into your life, how God is actually blessing you, and what a joy that is. Then that brings us into the final commandment, the 10th commandment, and not coveting people. And again, this is about living in the relationships we have and striving to make those relationships work. This is about how husbands and wives can be led astray by someone else, with the idea that the grass is always greener, and this is a problem in our culture. It's for employment as well. Luther touches on that we should not entice or force away. And I love that language of enticing or enforcement, because it says enticing is the carrot, right? It's greener over here, or force away. Well, if you don't do it, bad stuff will happen to you. Or turn them against him, make them think, make a wife or a husband think their spouse is no good, those kinds of things. Instead, we should be striving, saying, can we find a way to love and work through this relationship? That's certainly a big part of my pastoral task, because it's so easy for our relationships to become broken relationships, and God wants to preserve these things. In fact, what this commandment is trying to preserve is vocation, and and the joy of living where God has put us. And the wonderful thing about all of this is that God doesn't want us to be stuck. This isn't to say that you can't find a new job. This isn't to say that you're just stuck with everything you have. Situations do change. Absolutely, they do. But what it is saying is try to make the best of the relationships you have and don't give up on them, because they are, in fact, a gift of God. Well, next week we'll be diving into the Creed and the first article of the Creed. Until then, I pray God's blessings on your week.